Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.
Well, you know I'm not a photographer, right?
Sure.
I'm a painter. Okay. But I do take a lot of pictures, and I use film cameras still. It's a part of my artistic practice, actually, that I don't really use right now publicly. But for me, photography is capturing a moment in time. You were just talking about how technology now has enabled, a lot more people to take a lot more pictures, and how it's in a second. You have this thing for free, and for me, and maybe it's a generational thing, but I don't ever do selfies. I do have a series that I've done of myself reflecting in other things, so it's like a kind of selfie I think of. And that for me is a way of again capturing a moment in time and myself in that time and place. I've been trying to learn Photoshop recently, and we just had this philosophical conversation about Photoshop and photography recently in this class I'm taking. And that was really interesting because it got down in the end of the conversation was basically like, it's not if you're manipulating an image or not. It's the creative view that you're bringing to what, if it's film camera you're shooting with, if it's your phone, if you're doing all this editing on the tail end with Photoshop. It's what's inside of you that's creating that image.
Great. So is it Tamera? Tamera, how should I say your name perfectly?
So it's Hebrew.
Okay.
And so it's Tamera.
Okay.
And depending on where you're from, you
Right.
might pronounce it different ways. I grew up in the Midwest in the US, so I have a weird kind of twist to it, but Tamera.
Right. Okay, we're going to dive into your work, and I love going to people's spaces, and then because their environments instruct or inform, shape a lot of how they express themselves. And around us, because I'm a foreign set of eyes, it's my first time within your place, it's all new. Mm-hmm. And so what jumps out? So one thing is your beautiful cat, wearing the Victorian cover.
Yes.
Okay.
Frank. His name's Frank.
Frank.
Yeah.
Around us is a nice open sort of space, which in Hong Kong is a little bit rare and special because most places in Hong Kong are quite tight. Yeah. This is very nice. You referred to it as a house on the hill. We're neighbors. Yeah. Literally 100 meters from each other. Yeah. So it's sweet of you to let me into your place.
I'm sorry it's taken so long.
It's okay. It's no problem. It's no problem.
We're pretty solitary.
Well, I think that's just life today. I think people today tend to be in the culture, certainly in Hong Kong, and but being in the country park, we're hemmed in by green. It's just beautiful. Yeah. It's great. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's awesome. You want to dive into the photograph, and then that way we'll learn about you?
Sure.
So this one is called Beautiful Chaos. Yeah. And it's a photo of, now, is this stained glass? Is it a painting? What am I looking at?
It's a painting.
It's a painting. Okay. Yep. On
it's acrylic on, I think that's canvas. Okay. Yeah, okay. I do paint on linen sometimes, but I think that one was on canvas.
Okay, so it's basically a flat, there's no real perspective. Right. And so we've got geometric sort of shapes intertwined. So it looks like a big curls and lines kind of done, and then in between it creates these like squares and different sort of closed shapes that I'm assuming you've painted in with gray, with red, with white, with black. Yep. Yeah, so that's the palette seems to be red, black, white, and gray. Yep. How large is this piece?
That's pretty small. That one's like 18 by 24 probably.
Okay. Yeah. 18 by 24 inches. Yeah, right.
That was commissioned. Yeah, inches, sorry. Okay. That was commissioned for a friend. Okay. They have it in their workspace, yeah.
Okay. So why did you choose this? Okay, so the fact that it's called Beautiful Chaos, I mean, it's a chaotic, and it's just the whole field is just all these many shapes. So rough guess about, like, say, 400 or 300
yeah, I haven't counted them, but yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
And they're all essentially flat squares and rectangles and other shapes. Why start with this image, and why Beautiful Chaos?
Yeah, and one thing you might notice on this too is around the perimeter of the piece, not counting the bottom horizontal side of it, those shapes are larger than what you see in the center. Yeah. So that was, very intentional to try to draw your eye into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really thoughtful about what I name my pieces because they are usually abstract in nature in some ways, and when you show them to people, they always want to know, well, what is it? And it's like, well, it's abstract. That's the point, kind of. And I guess, like I was just saying about photography, for me, the work I make is usually the same thing. It's capturing an emotion or a time or experience that I've had. And so the name for this one, I'll start with that, these works were all works that I've made since COVID happened.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I called it this, trying to find beauty in the midst of all the chaos that was in the world at the time when I was working on this one. That's what, for me, art is it's trying to help me find the beauty in the world when things get tricky to figure out.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of what I make are forms of, it sounds a little corny, but like forms of meditation in a way. So this was just, the lines went down first. I just started I've made a couple of other pieces in this kind of style, and I enjoy doing it. So the lines went down first, and then I had a very limited color palette for this one because I was a commission and I was kind of asked to paint with these colors. But I liked the more kind of controlled aspect of that.
For sure.
That too. I tried to lay them down in such a way, and it toward the end it didn't quite work, but none of the same colors touch each other. So the listeners can't see that, but these grays aren't touching. Right. These whites aren't touching. Right. There's a black there and a black there. So I tried to work on it in a way that there's a pattern and a symmetry to it, but it's not obvious at first.
Well, it reminds me of a mosaic to a certain extent. That's why I asked: could
be stained glass?
It could be stained glass.
Yeah, it'd be cool stained glass. Actually, maybe I should.
Yeah. What's interesting is that on the one hand, calling it Beautiful Chaos, there is this chaotic feel of the lines and then the shapes as clearly not rational. They're accidental in a way, and it feels kind of accidental. Then when you say that you very specifically made the shapes on the outside to be larger so it does draw your eye in.
Yeah.
I could totally imagine looking at this on mushrooms and just seeing a whole world of whatever. Not that I've ever done mushrooms.
Me either.
But what I'm saying is like, it's definitely that kind of visual experience that you could see. It's like looking at clouds, you know? But the fact that you did it during COVID, and that's where your brain went. Now, when they asked you to do something, did they say to you, make it abstract, or did knowing that you work in abstract quasi-geometric ways, or were they just like, look, just use these colors, this is kind of what I'd like to see?
It was very loose.
Okay.
It was
nice.
I need I need it to match this space.
Okay.
And I'd never done something like that before, like just I want it to match my couch kind of thing. I mean, that's a saying that artists use a lot, like kind of in a disparaging way to if she they make art to people want to buy to match the couch kind of thing. And so if you think of yourself as a quote unquote true artist, you're not thinking about if it's going to match someone's couch. But in this case there was a color scheme, but those were the only parameters I had around it.
So what is your training or your background that led you to painting?
My background is in environmental science. I have a master's in environmental science, and I used to work professionally in that world. My family and I moved to Beijing, I was telling you, like almost 14 years ago now, and that's when I stopped working and we went for what was to be a year.
Yeah.
And we lived near an area called 798, which is this old munitions factory outside of the city center there that the government had converted into a kind of art space.
Right.
And this happens around China.
Yeah.
They say, okay, you can make art here. Go.
Right.
And so when we lived there were a lot of artist studios. There weren't so many galleries. Now they're like big name, mega galleries, they're called. Very few people, if anyone, at this point, like actually working there. Oh, okay. Making art.
Making art, yeah.
But I had access to that world when we were living in Beijing, and I'd always liked looking at art. I'd always been interested in art as a viewer, but not as a maker. Okay. And I think part of that is I never had the freedom before to have that be part of my life. Okay. It hadn't been my focus. Where I grew up, there was like, not only was there really no culture of as we would call it, it just like even the concept I didn't know what I didn't know. Even almost. Of course. Like I didn't even know there was art in the world kind of thing. And so for me, not speaking Mandarin, going to 798 and looking at the art there, which was mostly contemporary Chinese art, it was a way that I felt like I could see into the world there. Sure. In a way where spoken language, wasn't available to me.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I did have the time I had extra time. Right. Really to explore and to look at the world there. And I did a lot of that in Beijing. And I just started, I was taking a lot of pictures, but I also started just drawing in pencil. Okay. I would go to some part of the city and I would sit down and I would just sit there for hours and draw what I saw. And I didn't know how to draw at the time. And it's all very loose, which I like. But then I thought, I really enjoy doing this. And I really want to learn these skills that it takes to be an artist. And so part of it was inspiration by what I was seeing at 798. And part of it was this, being in this new place, wanting to capture the feel of it. Sure. And so I kind of took it on myself to put myself through art school. I couldn't go to art school, but I'm like, I'm going to be very methodical about this. And I, basically like looked at art school curriculums and so for the first year, pretty much I just drew in pencil and I took a weekly class in Chinese ink brush painting. Okay. And I was loving doing all of that. And then we stayed on in Beijing for another 2 years. And so I found some tutors, some artists that had studios in 798. And I wanted to learn to paint. Wow. So there was a woman I became friends with, and she would let me just come set up in her studio. And I could paint next to her. And if I had a question, I was really stuck on like, how do you make purple? How do you mix purple? And so, and it cost nothing. And she was happy, I think, to practice English. And, and she had gone to the top art school in China, which is in Beijing, and then got an MFA from a school in Germany. So she was really schooled in Eastern and Western techniques, and I was really interested in Eastern art too. And because I was coming at it from really no kind of art, Western art history knowledge or anything, I was definitely drawn more toward Eastern elements of design than Western. Okay. And so, but she was able to help me with both. Sure. And I took a life drawing class at the time that was available to me there. And so I was just...
I find that... so I'm going to interrupt for a second and say that, so the whole point of the podcast is we all have one life. Yeah. Right? And how do we make the most of every second? How do we make every second count?
Yeah, I saw, yeah.
Yeah, so I love that you're... In a way, we have slightly similar chords. So, you have the environmental science, and you kind of graduated into creative expression. Yeah. And so, part of me has always been into creative expression, and the sciences and conservation, and so there's a lot of convergence.
Yeah.
And I was saying that before. There's quite a bit of convergence. I feel just without even knowing you.
Yeah.
And these kind of episodes, for me, are fascinating because I get to meet people and find out how they tick.
Yeah.
And I love that. So the decision comes when you guys decide to move to Beijing. And then what are the dominoes that went tick, 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 and ended up before you guys decided, let's go, to getting to Beijing. And then obviously then once there and you had the space in your mind and around you and the time, your brain kind of just evolved, into creative expression. So what
happened in between?
Yeah, what were those dominoes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the one word answer to that was depression, and probably kind of in a clinical sense, but also just from working in the environmental field.
Okay.
It was just bleak,
Sure.
what I was seeing,
Sure.
and even at that time, I went to a really, really big state university in America, and at that school, there are 55,000 people at my school.
Wow. Okay.
And
not bad.
I was in the first, basically, environmental science program that they had there, and there were 16 of us.
Wow.
And now if you went back to that school, and any other major university in the world probably, I think the concept of sustainability, if it's business school or whatever, even art schools.
Sure.
That's like a foundation often of what is being talked about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I was really at the kind of front end of
Are you allowed to say which state?
Michigan.
Michigan, okay.
Yeah.
Michigan!
Yeah. So I born and raised, and then went to undergrad in Michigan, and then I moved to Colorado, which is where I think of as home. And once I got there, then I never felt like I belonged in Michigan.
Right.
It's just where I happened to,
be born. Yeah, no, I got it.
And then I went to graduate school in Colorado, and we lived there until moved to Asia. But so when I was coming into it, not many people were worried about these things, and now the world's on fire, right?
Sure.
And so I found myself in this, I guess, place where I was like Chicken Little, I'm like looking around and seeing how fucked up everything is, and no one else sees it.
Sure.
And that was really hard for me, and I was really, really passionate about what I was doing at that time. I grew up on a farm in Michigan, so I definitely, and I'm an only child, getting into kind of biography.
Sure.
But so I spent a lot of time on the land, on our farm.
Okay.
We had horses.
Wow.
I grew up with animals, and so I had this really deep connection to place,
sure,
and to the landscape of wherever I find, and still do, which is
sure.
why we live here.
Of course.
But to kind of see what was happening and to know what was coming, was really, really hard for me.
What? I'm good. Like maybe it's bad form for me to interrupt you, but at the point I'm just like, what area of environmental science were you studying in Michigan that kind of, not that you specialized in, but that really kind of drew you into, like, what area of environmental science was it in the commercial? It was more. It was.
I was interested in public policy.
Okay.
Really. So my coursework, there was a natural science component to it, but I also took a lot of econ classes and. Yeah, my master's degree is in public policy with a focus on environmental science. So,
wow.
So I was definitely like more kind of heading not the typical scientist direction, but more as a public. And then I ended up working for the federal government's environmental agency.
Oh wow.
In the U.S. So, yeah, and I worked with some of the. Should I move him?
No, it's fine. Okay. Him, you're pointing to she's pointing to the table, and then to the cat under the table, who's doing whatever he's just being a cat. That's fine. Okay. I have 5 cats and 4 dogs or whatever.
He's licking a strange collar thing.
It's totally fine.
Yeah, so I feel like, and even working, kind of at the highest levels in the U.S. government, on policy issues. And not to get into U.S. politics, but while I was there working, I started working under one administration, and then George Bush was elected to office. And at the time, he, seemed like the Antichrist to me.
Yeah.
Now only, if only we could have him back. So that's, and I was still I was in my 20s, and I just really thought that I could change the world, and I guess maybe we all go through this in some way, perhaps, where you kind of leave those younger. Well,
you mature. Yeah. You start getting a bigger perspective.
But yeah, so I worked in that world for a long time, but I was pretty burnout on it, and and my husband also works in that area, more on the conservation side of things. But we moved to China knowing really nothing about it. I mean, we're both fairly educated, and we feel like we pay attention to the world, and that's one reason we decided to go to Beijing for a year. We thought, wow, this will, we lived in the middle of the city the first year, and an apartment. Yeah. And that
must have been such a huge. When you go to Beijing for the first time, it's like you haven't seen a big city until you've seen it.
And it was the year right after the Olympics. Oh, so, wow. Okay. I mean, it was like, we would laugh. We're like, huge. Oh, they, helicoptered in another, 50-story building and dropped. That wasn't there yesterday kind of thing. And there were all these. I used to go down to the central train station with my camera. Mm-hmm. And there were just this kind of endless stream of laborers coming in on the train from wherever, all corners of China, and they'd have a single duffel bag. They'd never seen anything like that. They'd probably never left their village. Sure. And, they've been on the train for 27 hours or something. And the train, like a lot of things in China, the central train station is massive, right? And so they'd walk out, these little tiny specks of people, wide-eyed. And it was just this... Yeah. I guess maybe an equivalent for me as an American is, showing up at Ellis Island and getting off the boat and, or you see the Statue of Liberty for the first time or something as you're coming into the harbor. Beijing at the time had this really interesting energy to it. Mm-hmm. It was its coming out, and we were there to witness that. There were no credit card. Like, we bought our only car there with cash. Right. Like a suitcase full of cash almost. Because, and now there's no cash in China. Yeah.
No, it's changed like so quickly. For sure.
And so I feel really fortunate that we were there. And it was this, like we were talking about earlier, this enormous transitional time for me personally too. And, maybe that was fed by what was happening around me.
Absolutely. We'll probably get back to that. If you don't mind, I'll go to the next photograph, because what's great about this format is I say to you, you frame the conversation, what's important to you, what's going on in your life. You send me, it could be photos of anything. Yeah. And then my job is just to sort of connect the dots, if there are any, and then see where we end up. Here we go. Yeah. So this photograph is called Crater. Yeah. And so it's a very different feel from the other one, which was more sort of chaotic. This is is it a photo of a circular painting, or is it a circular?
It's a circular canvas.
It's a circular canvas. Okay. Yeah. So it's a circular canvas. It's the color palette is violet, blues, purples, black, yellow, gray. The way it's photographed now, it looks almost like you have this black with yellow X with a sort of target in the middle, and it's very geometric. It almost looks like one of those kaleidoscopes where you look through a tube and you see these like kaleidoscopic shapes. And
it'll be easy for you to tie this back, I think, domino-wise, and I didn't intentionally. I didn't know the conversation.
C'est la vie, we'll find
again something that I've made during COVID, and a friend of mine from Beijing, who lives in the States now, who's a curator, set up a group of artists all over the world. There were 15 of us, and created what she called the Crater Project. And it was an attempt to have, and these are artists that are working in print or textiles. There's one Japanese woman who makes her own dyes and, kind of puts them onto different materials. But it was all of our attempts to make works that addressed depression and what people were feeling during COVID and what artists were feeling in particular during that time. Because I think COVID had this really interesting effect on people that make art or do things creatively, and that you either were completely paralyzed by what was happening in the world and you couldn't produce a thing, or you were all you could do was work because you had to get it out of you.
Right.
And I would say there were kind of artists coming from both places that came together on this project, but so crater was kind of the prompt, this idea of a crater and metaphorically, but that's this kind of black space that you would fall into in the midst of depression. And so we were trying to create pieces that would help each other not feel so lonely in the world, or try to help other people when they would look at the collective body of work, realize they're not alone in a way.
Yeah.
There's some Nepali text that's been written on in the black sections there.
Oh, okay.
And the reason for that is before COVID, I spent a lot of time in Nepal, and there's an artist there who was part of this group, and the piece she made was circular, and she made her piece before I made this.
Okay.
And the interior, it looks like a labyrinth of sorts, and the interior of her piece are all these English words that it's almost like a thesaurus of words that also relate to depression.
Oh, okay.
And so it's this list of words that she wrote. So I asked her why she wrote those in English, and she said because she wanted the greater group to be able to read it.
Oh,
and I don't read Nepali, but I wanted to, I guess, honor what she'd done. And she'd lost her father during COVID in Nepal, and had a really hard time with that. Sure. So I made this piece to connect to her in a way. There's also another woman who was part of this group who's Native American and also lost her mother during COVID. Okay. And this all happened while we'd gotten together as a group. This hadn't preceded us getting together. So we kind of went through these experiences with each other. And so this piece also, you're describing it, but it looks... It could be a Native American war shield.
It really could.
And the color scheme, the purples, and the what looks like black is actually a really deep blue. And blue is a color that's you're feeling blue when you're depressed. It's symbolically the color of depression in many ways. Yeah. And so I wanted to have the purple in there because that, to me, is a color that is moving you away from that. It's a transitional color in a way. Right. There's some blue in it, but and then there's this kind of brightening in the purple sections toward light.
So as a visual cue for somebody listening, like imagine you're looking. It's a circle, and the eye is drawn from the outward in because, like, imagine with a pizza pie, it's like there are these triangular slices, and those are kind of purple. And as they go into the slice, it kind of becomes brighter, not fully white, but almost like this white violet. So when you say crater, and when I hear you describe it, and when I look at this, the eye is drawn to the center of the image. Therefore, the center, the bullseye, so to speak, of the painting is this not very geometric, it's slightly messy. It's the only sort of part of the painting that has some red to it. And imagine a sort of ashy, bloody moon almost in there. Now, so when I say this, what connections are coming up in you? Like, what is my reading?
Yeah. So that the center part of it is meant to kind of give you this sense of falling into the crater.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to draw you in and provide that sensation in a way, whether you know it or not.
Right,
but you're
right.
looking at this very dark
Yeah.
Area, and there is the kind of lighter section, reddish section in the middle. But yeah, it's related to again this concept of a crater, and that was what the woman who convened the group, that was the word she gave to us. But
it's a funny word to choose to pick. I mean, crater as a term, as a word, has such just the sound itself.
Yeah,
is very interesting in the sense that, and what it evokes, it's this idea of it's post-explosion.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's what's left after this massive like shock or trauma.
Yeah.
And so when you're describing it, we're looking at this, I connect this to Haruki Murakami's book, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles, where the guy spends some time in the bottom of a well.
Oh, every book of his, the guy spending time in the bottom of the well.
So he's
I'm
looking
a huge
up.
fan.
Right.
The collected works are right behind you.
There you go.
Yeah.
So then you look up, and then so it could be.
It's probably inspired by his work, actually,
some of it
in a way.
It's all,
he is my favorite author.
Nice.
By far. So
look at that.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's take a few steps back. So the person who brought this group together, why this group, and choosing depression, did she know, it was the person who brought the group together, did she know that everybody had this as a theme, or was it just going to come out anyways because we're human and it's COVID?
Probably the latter, I would say. She knew most of these people just professionally, I think. I'm very close friends with her, but I think she was having a hard time.
For sure.
And it wasn't selfish, that's too strong of a word, but I think she needed it in her life at the time, and she knew the rest of us needed it too.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I think it was, her attempt to take care of herself in a way, and her attempt to help others.
By creating a community. Yeah. Obviously. So, again, going back to the theme of the podcast, it's like this idea of the everyday is happening, and then somebody makes a decision. Let's bring these people together. Let's see what we can do together. How do we make the most of this moment? So can you name one thing that didn't have to do with your work that really kind of changed or inspired, or from somebody else's work, somebody else's story, that really kind of gave you a breath of air out of the well? Or
yeah, I think just getting to know people in this way. We've all had our own experiences with what's been happening, and obviously those of us in Hong Kong have had a different experience than a lot of other people in the world. So it was interesting to connect with, and I, again, two of the people in this very small group lost their parents to COVID while we, after we convened. So
around this theme.
Yeah. And I've actually been part of a couple of kind of COVID, in the midst of COVID created artistic groups like this, collectives. And I've actually, I was saying I hadn't gone to art school, but since COVID started, I've been doing a 3-year online program with one of the top art schools in the U.S. And I've been taking also classes with the Art Students League of New York, which is this really esteemed organization. And, I never would have been able to do either of those things if it hadn't been for COVID. And so I've met also, and I did a residency this summer with the School of Visual Arts in New York. All of this came to me through COVID. I mean, none of those opportunities, I think, either the opportunities wouldn't have been there, or I wouldn't have had the structure or the time in my life to
motivation.
I was going to Nepal a lot before COVID. We'd go back to the States in the summer.
Sure.
we had this, Hong Kong was home, but it was more like home base.
Right.
Not a place we were kind of really deeply rooted in. Sure. And that I would say is the case now.
Yeah. No choice.
Whether we want to be or not, but we're happy to be really happy to be.
Yeah.
And so, so the group, and there was a woman in Norway there who hand makes paper, and she lives in one of the fjord areas, and so she goes in the mountains behind her house and collects natural fibers and makes paper and
collection of people to kind of meet and exchange. Nice.
A guy who's described kind of as a homesteader who lives in Oregon, and he hand carves spoons. That's his artistic practice. Awesome. Beautiful. And interestingly, I think because of this group, he had a friend he lost to COVID.
Oh, wow.
And that person's, I think, partner asked him if he would make a coffin. And so he actually has been hand making from wood, and he makes these slats that he kind of weaves together.
Amazing. Wow.
So that it's not a coffin in the kind of traditional sense of it's not this hermetically sealed box that's lined in velvet, and it's actually got open spaces in it. So it's breathing and put into the earth, and so it really and I think probably that for him came out of this group, and
wow.
So and we all it was a really interesting community of people.
I love that I am your neighbor. We connect through mutual contacts. It's Friday morning. Come over, have water, coffee, have a conversation. And I love that walking up here. I had no idea, expectations of what will we talk about. I get to meet somebody new.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, look at what we've covered, like what we've discovered. It's amazing. I'll use that as a segue to the next photo. Okay. So one thing that I that's emerging, or that I can just see and just basically easily identify, is that you make order. You're very deliberate. So on the one hand, you make these abstract images, and as abstractions, by definition, they kind of live without a term, without a word. Like
they're not representations.
Beautiful chaos is ultimately is framed by. So the words themselves are so crucial. Mm-hmm. It is. That's
why I was saying it's what I name the works is really a big piece of it, and the names come at the end.
Right, of course. Okay, that's interesting.
And I spend a lot of time. Okay. So this one is called Unity.
And let me describe.
Yeah, good luck.
It's just naming the things that I kind of connect to. Mm-hmm. So it's like almost like a batik looking pattern where you could easily see this like as a fabric. And so the colors there's whites but there's, what is the foundational color? And because it's patterns, one of them could be black, and yet another one's kind of cream. And there's reds and whites and oranges and yellows. This to me says, if it's a painting, it's extremely fine, detailed work. Mm-hmm. But it could easily be a photograph of fabric that you've sort of sewn with various sort of wool strings, and because I'm a human, I can't help but create and see a seated figure in the middle of the thing, kind of like with an arm on the left. Almost sitting in a skirt of sorts on the ground. The color palette is evocative of, for example, African art. That's kind of, the yellows and the reds and the brightness. It's a very bright image, whereas Crater was a very dark image. Mm-hmm. So Unity. Talk to me about Unity.
So this piece was kind of born out of an assignment I had in this program I was just mentioning to you. I had a class called Materials Abstraction.
Okay.
Which I really enjoyed. I had never worked in collage before. This is a collage. And, Yeah, it's interesting to hear what you see, because I never know what people see, and that's one reason I actually create what I create, because I like to have these conversations around it. To me, it's a way of really like revealing a part of myself outside of spoken language. Sure. Unity, there's all sorts of stuff going on. So the base of this is canvas board. Okay. So it's a firm surface. It's not loose like a stretched canvas would be. The red and white kind of sections you see throughout it, that's actually when I traveled to Nepal, I was going there so much, I got interested in handmade paper there. Okay. And so I started kind of I'd find places where this was still being made by hand in a traditional way, and I started buying paper there. So I did that also in Japan and Bhutan. I've got a big stack of paper upstairs, and it was always very precious to me. It's like having a really nice bottle of wine that you kind of like you love and it's beautiful, but you never want to drink it or use it. But I decided to use a piece of it for this work, and so the red and white, that's a pattern that was printed by hand by someone in Nepal. Okay, and so I'm trying to describe it in the layers kind of as it's built up. Right. So you can see there's red kind of yarn. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And so within the geometric shapes that are formed there, what I did with the white spaces in the paper is I took a knife and cut out the majority of the white space that was part of the print. Okay. And so there are these little windows poking through. And so that's acrylic paint within those windows. And then within the geometric shapes made by the yarn, I outline those in black. So they set apart from the other areas. And then that whole area is its own geometric shape.
How large is this piece?
This one is, I'm sorry, I'm doing inches. This one's probably like 30 by 40. So it's got elements of painting in it. It has elements of my interest in handmade Asian papers. It has drawings that I've made. The orange and yellow sections that you see are pieces cut out. Another kind of thing I've been interested in over the years.
So is Unity, first of all, I love the fact that while we're talking, butterscotch. Yeah, goes over, starts drinking water. So to the listener, it's like, oh, what was that sound? Yeah, it's okay. It's the dog having some water.
Overweight dog, Beijing street dog.
Awesome! I didn't know it was Beijing street dog. But okay, so it's called Unity, and what we've talked about so far is the process, and the materials, and
it's
everything.
Hard for people to see that. Yeah,
but it's a podcast about visual media, so it's very stupid. But what is the significance of this image in your mind in terms of what it evokes in you to be an important piece?
Yeah. So just quickly, the orange and yellow are pieces from prints I've made in this traditional Japanese style called mokuhanga, which I've studied. I've gone to Japan a few times to study, and I studied with a teacher in the U.S. So it's Unity because for me, this piece represents again, places. It's got a piece of Nepal. It's got a piece of Japan. Okay. It's the paper cutting I did, not in any way close to the style, but they're one of the traditional kind of crafts in China is a form of paper cutting. Okay. So it has elements process-wise. Right. And there's little tiny spots of turquoise in there. Right. Okay. Like little dots of turquoise. Yeah. And so
like constellations, really.
Constellations, yeah. So that, I'm from kind of the western part of the U.S. and that connects back. That's a stone that is worn by the Navajo people and also by the Tibetans. And I have, connections to.
Are those stone or are those just pieces?
Yeah, they're tiny stones.
Oh, okay, amazing.
So Unity is both like of place, of places that are important to me, of styles, of different forms of art that, there's painting, there's printing, there's drawing. Right. So it's a unification of all of these things.
So here's the $1 million question. How do we tie all of this to environmental science? and your formation and your brain's formation and connection to environmental science.
What do you think?
Not this particular paint. No, but like, it's one thing to just say pedantically, not pedantically, but, you know, sort of like, it's a metaphor for why is my throat killing? 1 second. It's one thing to say, oh, it's like a metaphor for, you know, global melting pot human experience. Okay, let's just say that's the first level. Mm-hmm. But if we dive deeper than that, what is the connection between unity, crater, and beautiful chaos? Because all of it is you, right? Like, mm-hmm. you know what I mean? Like, if you're right-handed, that affects your expression in the world. Are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
Exactly. So you're right-handed. Mm-hmm. So if you're left-handed, you would be a different person in a way.
Of course.
So these are all things that inform your expression and make it unique. So how do we make that connection to environmental science? Because you committed so many of your early formative years into this one area that was very dark. I've always been a conservationist, and it's funny because one of the the pillars of the podcast is service leadership, creative expression, but it's also conservation and strong women. So you nailed all four. Well, maybe not service leadership. We haven't gone to there just yet. But how do you make a synthesis of your 3 paintings and to the work that you've done?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a big question in many ways. It's all an evolution, you know, and like you're saying, it's all, of course, you know, the two of us find ourselves sitting here, have a conversation today. How did we get here? Mm-hmm. I don't know, you know, I don't know any of your background. And you didn't know anything about me before we sat down here, but here we are. Yeah. So, you know, I never imagined I would be an artist, you know, and it's really interesting actually when I do go back to the States, because this is who I am now. Yeah. This is a practice that I have to do every day of my life now. Yeah. But I was not me in this form back there. No one there thinks of me in this way, you know, and I share images with people and you know, I think I've done pretty well in a short period of time. I
love that it's probably really confusing to people. Who knew the old you?
Like, I get,
What happened to you that you're, I love that.
I mean, I think you probably experienced this whenever you go back to where you might think of as home or where you came from. You know, the experiences we have as expats and the places we've seen and the people that we just meet in our everyday life. I think our friends and family, they, you know, people will be like, "Oh, how's Hong Kong?" And you start to answer the question, and they've already moved on to something else. Or you know, or people like, "I'm from Hong Kong. Oh, do you speak Japanese?" You know, it's even, you know, like I'm always blown away by that. So many people will say that. So I think it's just part of that for people. You know, it's like they don't know this piece of me, and to me, it is very connected and fluid. And you know, and you were saying how did I jump from environmental science to making art full time, pretty much? And it came out of this time of depression and confusion and trying to understand the world. You know, I think in the middle where that section you were asking about earlier, I had a child that completely changed my perspective on the world. And I wanted to figure out a way to move out of kind of a dark place into one more of hope and trying to see beauty. And so really my daughter's birth was a very transitional moment for me. And, you know, and art saved me in many ways. And it created this outlet for
100%.
me. And now has created these relationships with other people that understand this. And so, and I think because when I started out, I hadn't gone to art school and I was really able to, you know, go to Japan and study woodblock printing or, you know, become interested in paper. And so I had this freedom to just kind of do whatever I wanted. And so every piece I've made, I think of as really a learning experience. And I'm always learning about art. And that's what I really love about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for these hours go by actually. This 1 hour, it goes by very quickly. Tamera, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Obviously, I'm going to try to get people to discover your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, my pleasure.
And great to finally sit down.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.